Hello and welcome back to the Halfway Point. The NHS app is something most practices will be promoting, but the real question is, are patients actually using it? And more importantly, are practices making the most of what it can offer? Because when used well, the NHS app can do much more than simply book appointments. It can support the repeat prescriptions, reduce admin, improve communication, encourage self-service, and become a real valuable part of your practice's digital front door. So to help me unpack this, I'm really pleased to be joined by fellow LPM Director and NHS App Ambassador, James Bowman. Hi, James. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Ben.
Let's start with your background, James, kind of with the NHS App Ambassador Programme as well. Let's dive into that a little bit. So if you can tell us a little bit around your background with it and how you've joined the NHS App Ambassador Programme.
I've been an NHS App Ambassador now for just over 15, 16 months now as part of my PCN role of development and transformation or digital transformation lead at a PCN that I do as well. I thought it only fitting that we should have somebody that's an app ambassador that's part of the NHS App Ambassador Programme. Really simple. You sign up via the NHS App Ambassador website. There's a support group that are very active on Teams. You can message them. But it's there really for all staff to promote and support the use of the app. This can be a clinician, a receptionist, an administrator, a manager. It can be anybody within a practice really. The role is really there for practical use, and it includes helping patients with downloading and setting up the app, promoting it within the practice environment. With the practices I've worked with, I've put on 3 or 4 2.5-hour slots, advertised it to the patient groups. We're going to do a bit about the patient app. I've learned through time not just to do mass text messaging to patients and just do targeted approaches, saying that we will be at this village hall or we will be in the local library between this time and that time. You're more than welcome to come and join us if you've got a query about the NHS app or you're struggling to get hold of the NHS app. I tend to give the patients a bit of a spiel about it. Being an NHS App Ambassador, it's also supporting the staff in the practice, because the practice then becomes the first point of call with patients saying, I don't understand this, or something's happened. Why can't I see this in my medical records? And again, it's all about how practices set up the back end in the clinical system of what patients will be able to see within the NHS app. Mm. The NHS app has just gone through a major update in the last couple of weeks. So the look and feel of the app is totally different. We're still getting our head around looking at how that looks like. And if you've got the NHS app yourself, it's really simple to just go on and have a look yourself and browse around it. But the biggest update now is that secondary care is included in it, and you can start to make and cancel appointments at secondary care or rearrange appointments using the secondary care part. So that should then negate patients calling the practice, saying to the practices, where's my hospital appointment? Can you ring the hospital about my... They should be able to go onto the NHS app and look at it and find out where their hospital appointment is or where their referral is up to. Ideally, but we know that that doesn't necessarily happen because patients aren't okay with technology. Some of them don't have that digital footprint. So there will be the odd exclusion for it as well. Really, being an NHS App Ambassador is key to the ownership as well. Without having a named lead, that promotion often becomes inconsistent.
Right.
It's about making sure that practices have got somebody that they can go to, or they know how to get hold of something. The network of NHS App Ambassadors at the moment, there was a message popped through on Teams last night. Somebody was struggling to find where it was published about the new updates and the links to it. Myself personally, I've literally sent an email this morning to all my practices in the PCN saying, this is the update, please ensure your staff are aware of it. Quick cut and paste it in to one of the other app ambassadors. They've got it straight away. You get a thumbs up or a smiley face emoji, and you help another app ambassador out. Even over the weekend, there were some error codes being published a patient's come in with this error code. Where can we find that error code? So there's a wealth of knowledge that people are then just like, have you looked here? Have you tried this? Have you, in the clinical system, have you tried X, Y, and Z? So it's a good support network as well, especially as we try to find our way around it.
And what's encouraging there is, we've spoken about it before, but I've done training on the NHS app. I think, it's a really powerful tool for kind of managing our own health as patients, and also encourage our own patients to. But seeing it from your perspective, I've always kind of championed practices to have someone in the practice join the program, become the NHS app champion. Normally I say, who's the person in your practice that everyone looks to? And, spoiler, if you can't figure out who it is, chances are it's you. But hearing how you've talked about it from the idea of the PCN point of view, or even at a federation level, it's really encouraging to have that other layer of support. So, like you said, the content is going to be the same for all your practices whenever there's an update or anything like that. So you can support the practices almost at a bigger scale, rather than having each practice kind of having to put the resources aside themselves to make it work. So, and has that been your experience running it from a PCN point of view?
It has, and I think now that word's getting out and about, especially on the East Coast in North Yorkshire, where my PCN that I work with is, we've now got the local authority, local government and council coming to me, and I'm now going to support the digital tools individuals within the libraries.
Oh, wow.
They're now putting on specific sessions, 2.5 hour slot in the library with their digital IT geeks as part of their. I use geeks.
I know. I laugh in solidarity, acceptance.
They run these clinics in the local libraries to get people online, or to show people how to get online, or use Google, or submit a form for health reasons or social reasons. So I'm going there to help support them with the NHS app. So it then becomes a bit of training for those digital champions. So those digital champions are then going to learn more about the app, so they can then pass on that knowledge. But I think the key thing is being able to explain why the use of the app is becoming more important.
Yeah.
I know we're at an age where people are going, not another app. Yes, it's another app. But I think the power of it is going to make sure that the patient is at the heart of delivering their own healthcare, or looking after their own healthcare, or having access to their patient record at their fingertips. We know it's not going to suit everybody. And as I say, when I'm going through these sessions with patients, if somebody doesn't have a smartphone, they can still phone. They can still walk in. It's not taken away. It's actually given them more options. I'm saying, if you're sat having your breakfast, you don't want to be on the phone at 8 o'clock trying to be that first person, trying to beat that 8 a.m. rush.
Yeah.
What if you're having your supper the night before and you think, oh, I'm not too right, I've been like this for a couple of hours. You've got access to be able to use 111 via the app now.
Yeah.
You could do that, and then obviously try and book an appointment. Those practices that have opened up their pre-bookable slots for immunisations, phlebotomy, cervical smears, women's health type stuff, or even the odd GP appointment, that's all now being able to book in there at your convenience, or the patient's convenience. There's ways of, it's more than just requesting your medication now. There's more about booking and managing your GP appointments, as I said, viewing your records and test results, so that when that patient's had their blood tests done in the practices, a lot of practices are now saying, unless you hear from us, you can see your results in the app. They shouldn't need to contact you unless there's something abnormal.
Yeah.
You can see all your test results in the NHS app. Your messaging within it as well. All text messages will now come by the NHS app. And it's a really important bit is to ensure that any of the patients that download the app or use the app are turning their notifications on. So we're used to notifications popping up on our phones. If that notification doesn't get read within the 2-hour window, it will then default to a normal SMS or email message as well. So there's always backups to it.
And hearing about the library is really useful as well. Just coming back to the beginning of what you said there, because much of this topic is around digital innovation helping, I keep saying our patients, but us as well. We're all a patient somewhere. And tools like the NHS App help patients manage their care more in a digital approach. But what's really nice about this, I think, is, and you've highlighted a few things there are people who are digitally excluded. There are people where the only mouse lives in the basement. I completely get that. And we need to have the resources this frees up so that we can support those patients. But there's also patients who they just need help setting it up. So like your drop-in clinics at the library or even the smartphones, the NHS App runs as a website as well. So, for your NHS login. So it's not exclusively on a phone. If you're used to a computer but not a smartphone, you're not excluded.
If you're on a tablet, on a laptop, on a desktop, you can still access it.
Exactly.
Via the NHS App website.
Yeah.
And it's, as an ambassador, you've got to know all the tools and the routes into it as well.
So the NHS App obviously evolved immensely. Wasn't the first to the market by a long way. The System 1 and the Patient Access and the EMISs and the Vision platforms were there a long time before the NHS App. COVID had a massive part to play, and without bringing back too many negative memories, as soon as you said to everyone you need a COVID passport to go to the pub, the NHS App download spiked. So, no correlation there, I wonder. But it's sort of like, now we've got it in our pockets, now we're using it. Let's evolve it. So you're talking about the secondary care pathways that have come in recently. I see it on the other side where working with a lot of dispensing practices, the dispensing software, not so much the native ones, but software like Titan, and I think ProScript is going towards it, and the major pharmacy suppliers can now have the element to advise the patient when the prescription is ready to collect. So there's always been the part of the app that says your prescription is done from the GP point of view. The new part is for pharmacies to carry on that message and say your prescription is ready to collect from your pharmacy in the high street or wherever. Now, we can't do anything about that at practice level. Dispensary practices have got some control on it based on the systems they use. But fundamentally, what we can do is go to our local pharmacies and say, one, have you got this feature? And two, can you turn it on? Because when you get it right, and as I've seen some of the practices I work with, we can now change the phone messages, similar to you said about the blood results, and say, if you're ringing about your prescription, look at the app first. And where we've seen it, the calls have fallen off a cliff because the patients who are already using the app are now going, oh, hang on, I'll look in there. And it will say whether it's fully dispensed or if there's an owing or if there's a problem, whatever. So you can set new protocols up. And I think that's only the beginning of these kind of journeys. So the secondary care part is really encouraging to hear that on top of this pharmacy side.
You're right, because, with the prescription tracker now available within the app, it's like doing your shopping on Amazon, isn't it? You want to know where your parcel is. You want to know where in the process you've done your order, you've made your order. Now, where am I in the delivery queue as such? And that's the whole point of it, isn't it? And, there are some challenges. There are, people's understanding and perception of it. But the more we get used to it, it will become daily life. Yeah. It's like our banking app. It's like us booking our holiday online with our travel agents, with our airline things. We do it day in, day out. And it's just a case of now bringing primary care and secondary care into the 20.
Yeah. Following the success of LPM's very first New to Practice Manager Conference, we are bringing them back with dates right across the country. This year, we're heading to Hull, Salisbury, Newcastle and Preston. And the best part, it is completely free to attend. If you're new to the practice manager role and feeling like everyone else has the manual except you are not alone. These conferences are relaxed, practical and honest. Real conversations, useful learning and tools you can take straight back to your practice. You'll also meet trusted industry partners, leaders in their own field who are there to support you and help you grow with confidence. You will leave clearer, better connected and ready to lead. Head to locumpm.co.uk to book your free place and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook to stay up to date. We would love to see you there. So let's look at the real challenge. Let's get to the meat of the conversation then. If we've got the tool, we know the history, it's a powerful tool, we've got patients, as a good number of patients might have access to it in our practices. And on a side note, obviously, a good way to look at that is the NHS App dashboard, and you can see how many downloads you've got. Download seems to be the metric that NHS England are looking at. Someone once pointed out to me once, download is lovely, what's the actual usage? How many people, not just how many people have got it, how many people are using it each month. So I always tend to lean more on the usage figures than download. But NHS England, we need to have a comparative, so we look at downloads as that tool. It's a fair method, but I say the usage, I think, is more rich in it. But I think, so we've now got an idea of where we are as a practice. The question then becomes promotion versus adoption. It's one thing to send out those texts, but how do we get the adoption? And so you said something earlier on, we're talking about texts, actually, targeting texts. So if you expand on that, how have you seen targeting text work as opposed to, say, a catch-all to all, 10,000 patients who are an adult within our practice population?
With some of the other digital tools that are out there that practices are utilising, things like Wellbe or Anima, etc., that are doing more targeted long-term condition recalls.
Yeah.
That patient is going to get one text message for a long-term condition recall, whether that's to book their blood tests, their pre-tests, before they come and have their long-term condition review. So that it's making every contact count, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're not bombarding somebody with 12, 13 texts throughout the year. They're getting a maximum of 2. Your long-term condition review is due. You need X, Y, and Z doing first, and then we'll follow you up with a longer appointment to do your diabetic review, your CHD review, etc., etc., etc. All in one appointment. And that's what I mean by a more targeted approach.
Yeah. And then, using those systems and having, like I said, in those text messages, you can book your appointment through the app. You can check the updates on your blood test through the app. So, direct targeting in the context of something rather than just, say, a generic mail out. We see it as practice managers all the time. How many emails do we get a day which are just generic sales in nature? And we automatically dismiss it. So patients aren't any different. There has to be a context to these messages that go out. And so in those cases, the recall system, you're inviting them to the app. And that seems to work really well. I agree. I've seen that work in practices kind of across the country. So alongside the text messaging then, if a practice wanted to improve their NHS app adoption today, where should they start?
Some general advice that I'd probably give to practices is making sure that it's everybody's responsibility in the practice. That every patient interaction is an opportunity to speak about the app.
Yeah.
That's not just sat in the clinical room. And I know GPs and the clinical staff are busy doing what they do. Mm-hmm. But if I think when my care coordinators in the PCN, for example, are dealing with patients in their own home and they've done, some bloods at home, the first thing they say is, have you got the app? If not, have you thought about it? You can check your blood results there. Or just remember, you'll be able to see everything in the app that we've talked about today. You'll be able to see your referral in the app today, so you don't need to, do it. Mm. Secondly is then all the national resources that are available via NHS Digital, for example. There's posters, there's leaflets, there's SMS templates, there's videos, there's guides.
Yeah.
At LPM, one of our partners that we work with, Redmore Health, they've got a really good social media team.
Yeah.
And I know that they regularly do a targeted social media campaign to remind people about the NHS app. So that is always being targeted on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on how much you want.
Yeah.
Practice can use their social media. They can use their in-practice screens. A pop-up banner, pull-up banner in the waiting room, anything to promote the use of it.
And when we've got patients, same patients aren't coming in every day. Well, bar exception of a few, maybe. That. Yeah, I slightly amend that as I was saying it. But in the main, we've got a fresh cohort of people coming through our doors, digital or physical. So they've not seen that literature. So to your point, whilst it might feel like I've said the message 100 times to download the app, it might be the first time you're saying it to the patient at the desk in front of you. So I think you're right to encouraging staff to almost become advocates of the app themselves, really, isn't it?
It is. If I take one of the clinics I run at one of the local village halls for one of the practices, in one afternoon we saw 170 patients.
Wow.
The average age was about 72.
Okay.
And as I was explaining to 2 or 3 people at a time how to get on the app, what they need to do, etc., etc., there was this dear woman. She was 70, and she went, "I'll help you," and she sat there going round helping others.
Wow.
The stigma that the elderly are not, don't have the knowledge or the technical ability proves it wrong.
No, I know. Yeah.
So, there are ones out there, and it's just a reminder, there are some that go, "Well, I don't know, I understand that." Or, I've got a shared email address with my wife or my husband, my spouse. What do we do? It's then reminding them that they can set up a proxy access. They have to get permission from the practice.
Yeah.
That's why staff need to know how to set up the proxy access in the back end of the system to link it all up together so they can then have that proxy access in the one login under the one user as such.
Yeah.
But that's not only just for husband, wife, or etc. You've got to be mindful of safeguarding as well,
Of course.
especially if there's somebody that may be under domestic violence or
coercion, and
So you've got to be mindful that you're not just granting somebody proxy access if there's a safeguarding issue.
Yeah.
But then that also falls down to the parent and child, because the child can't have access to the app as an individual from the age of 0 to 13 years. So you need to be able to grant the parent, the guardian, access to that child's record as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of practices tend to forget that they need to put a flag onto the child record that when the child becomes 13, proxy access becomes void.
It's disabled,
Ready for the GILIC competency.
Yeah.
You can grant it up to the age of 16, 17, 18 for the parent, but at 13 is where the cut-off, because the child should be able to then have the access.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as they've got the GILIC competency.
Yeah.
So again, that education for staff as well.
Yeah.
And it's making sure that staff know how to access that in EMIS, in Medicus, in System 1, how to grant that proxy access and link it. And it's a good way of actually practices understanding their patient population. So if you've got a child registered at a practice, for example, and mum and dad aren't registered at the practice for whatever reason, they're not going to be able to get proxy access.
No.
Everybody's got to be registered at that practice.
That's a good point for that side of it. Yeah, and a proxy access as well. That reminds me, one of the examples I've seen where it works really well is giving medication access to the care and nursing homes. We picture, especially the large homes, if you've got a couple of 60, 70 plus size beds, all of a sudden that's a couple of hundred patients, complex patients. They're in nursing homes, they're in care homes. By its very nature, they're some of our complex patients. So having the care home staff being able to order through proxy reduces that admin burden of trawling through the emails, or heaven forbid, the handwritten post-it note that appears in the letterbox or on the ward round, So it doesn't eradicate all problems. Yeah, there are still going to be like the acutes that need tailoring up and down, all that kind of stuff. But in the main, where it's just those regular repeats, they've had their review, and it's that constant monthly cycle, probably 80, 90% as a rough estimate, they can go through like normal, and they can go electronically to the pharmacy and off they go and work their magic to the home. So that saves a whole load of workload on practices. And especially, I say, if you're a practice with kind of anything 100, 200 beds upward on your, collective, your care homes across your practice area, it's worth exploring. And I say that there's a lot of governance around it, and we've skimmed over some of these topics today. I'll come into how we can cover more of that in a bit. But talk to your ICBs, talk to your digital leads, talk to your NHS App Ambassadors. There are governances and checks and balances to do, not least of all that the care home staff have to be on NHS Mail, which is, speaking from experience, a whole process in its own right to get the staff registered. But again, that just forms part of the good governance and the safety aspects within there. So I think kind of we look at this kind of, especially that's a good example of where the workload pressures are continuing in general practice. It's not slowing down. That digital self-service is essential. So I guess kind kind of in wrapping up and kind of takeaways, if you could give practices, let's go with 2 practical things to do this week to improve NHS app uptake, what would they be?
I would say promotion, consistent messaging is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But I think, the NHS app is fundamentally changing and shifting the way that patients access care. And from a practice perspective, it's a huge change. We should be able to see it reduce peak demand on phones and freeing up staff to deal with more complex queries if we get it right and the patients are educated and the staff are educated in the way that it's being used. Yeah, I would say get it promoted, get the literature out there. Get somebody in the practice signed up to be an app ambassador if they're not an app ambassador. It takes 10 to 15 minutes. They can cut, they get access to all the information. There's support information on future NHS. It becomes a tool for the future and hopefully making practices' lives a little bit easier from an administrative burden.
Yeah.
Well.
And so I guess where to go for more resources then. So we talked about the NHS Ambassador Programme. There is also a whole load of content that James mentioned on with NHS Digital around the promotional tools, the posters and the stuff like that. I guess my tip would be to expand on that. Is promotion is one thing and taking the resources from NHS Digital. I find when you put your practice logo on it, or we mentioned Redmore earlier, if you're using their AI avatar program, when it's your senior partner saying to patients, albeit through the AI avatar, but when they're saying to patients, get the app, keep track of your prescriptions, your medical record, etc., that carries more weight than just the standard NHS England.
Personalisation.
Yeah, exactly.
Personalisation is key because you're taking ownership of it then. Yes, we're not responsible for the app and the development of the app. NHS Digital or NHS England are, or Department of Health and Social Care, in new money as it comes down. But, if you personalise it, patients then see it as it's coming from you.
Yeah.
They know that you're owning it, you're promoting it as such. And of course, they will come to the practice when something goes wrong. But it's then telling it, being able to say, well, sorry, I can't deal with that. You need to go via the helpline or the help button that's now available in the NHS app.
I suppose then, just in wrapping up then, if today's conversation has got you thinking about how your practice could better promote and make use of the NHS app, we do run a NHS app practical training session, and more details on that can be found on the website. And this is kind of looking at the history, features, adoption tips, what we talked about today, but in a bit more detail. And that's kind of covering at all levels of the practice, from reception all the way up to practice management, NHS App Ambassador level. So if you want to know more, locumpm.co.uk or contact us. All the details will be on the show notes as well. James, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been really informative, and I hope it can encourage our listeners as well to explore the NHS app. I say dust that conversation off the to-do list and have a look at it today so that you can expand your downloads. And I say use the reporting tools to measure those, to see the improvements of the work you're doing, so you can find out what works in your area. Thank you, James, again for joining me. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week at the halfway point. Thank you. Thanks, James. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of The Halfway Point. We hope today's conversations have given you a fresh inspiration and practical ideas you can take straight back into your practice. You will find all the links and resources we mentioned in the show notes at locumpm.co.uk. The Halfway Point is available on all major podcast platforms in both audio and video formats, so you can tune in however suits you best. If this episode helps you, we would generally love to hear from you. Leave us a review or a comment. Not only does it make our day, it also helps us shape future episodes around what matters most to you. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you do not miss next Wednesday's episode. And if you know a colleague who would benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching for the Locum Practice Manager. We're on YouTube too, where we share practical tips and tutorials for primary care managers. Until next time, keep moving forward, keep improving, and we'll see you again next week at the Halfway Point.